So we talked about what modeling is, right? Modeling is kind of like sculpting or just making the 3D objects with our different tools. Surfacing or texturing, that's when we're putting a surface on to the model. I'm going to be able to show you how to do that in subsequent videos, but that's just our way of applying some color to the surface of the model. Texturing is like surfacing, but it usually refers to creating a kind of a custom hand generated or hand painted image or artwork and adding that to the material on the 3D surface. You can create a material that's just a color or some surface quality, but when you're texturing, it usually means that you're creating something specific, usually with Photoshop or a 2D software package, and then applying that to the 3D model. UV editing is something we're going to refer to. These aren't the same thing, but they're kind of dependent on each other. In order to texture something, you need to be able to alter the way that those 2D textures are applied to the 3D geometry. And so there's a special way of doing this in Maya that we'll talk about that's called UV editing. UV is kind of the coordinates of the textures as they correspond to the points on the 3D model. Maya allows you to view your scene in this way as shaded gray. If you go to the shading drop down here in your viewport, this window is called a viewport, and every viewport has some specific parameters of how it is rendering what you're seeing. You have these options in the shading menu, right? Wireframe is this option where we're not seeing the geometry, we're just seeing the edges of things, right? And that allows us a little more clarity sometimes to be able to see through things and really understand how they're put together. But it's not the whole picture. Also in the shading menu, you have smooth shade selected items, which will just shade those things I've got selected, and the other things go to wireframe. Flat shade all allows me to see the geometry with no softened edges, so we can just see a very crisp array of polygons. You also have flat shade selected items, so we can do that with just certain items if we want to isolate those. And you have bounding box, which allows you to see all your objects as a simple box in wireframe. Now that's not very useful for manipulating those objects by themselves, but if you start to have a lot of things in the scene and it's getting a little bit chaotic, this can be a way of sorting things out and organizing them. So there are hotkeys for these. Number 4 on your keyboard, just the number 4, allows you to see wireframe. 5 is smooth shaded. 6 is the textured view, which we don't have any textures on these, but 5 would just be the gray, and then 6 would show us the textures. We'll get to that in a minute. 7 allows me to use the scene lights, and right now I've got all my scene lights hidden, so everything shows up black when I hit that. But for most purposes, as we're modeling, this smooth shaded and wireframe 4 and 5 are the hotkeys that you're really going to want. As you start adding texture, you're going to want to use number 6 to show you things with texture on them. The viewport that we're looking at right now is a perspective view. You probably figured that out. Maya also allows you to view things orthographically. So if you click this button over here to the left, it'll show you a 4-up view, one of which is a perspective view, one of which is a top-down view of the scene, one of which is a front, and one is a side view of the scene. And these are 4 different views. You can get to this by clicking this button over here, or going back to just your perspective view with this button. Or you can just tap the space bar as you're hovering over your scene. Just quickly tap the space bar, and it should bring up these 4 windows. And as your cursor hovers over one of those windows, if you hit the space bar again, it'll zoom into that orthographic view. So this allows you to quickly jump from one view to another. I spend most of my time modeling in the perspective view just because I feel like it's more realistic and it gives me a better view of what's going on. But sometimes when I have some important operations to do, I really like to see things from the top or the side or the front, some of these orthographic views. You see that they're not in perspective at all. So that's really helpful. And we'll cover more of these in the next video as we kind of travel around the Maya user interface, and we'll talk about what each of these things can do for you.